The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
Hi, welcome back. This is Arlene and you're still with me on the Durian Heat and together with John Chua, documentary filmmaker, and he has been documenting the female genital mutilation or cuttings in Asia. I forgot to ask early on, this is about the cuttings. Different culture or different communities, do they cut differently and why?
There are four types of female genital mutilation according to WHO. And there is one type, actually a subset of type 1A they call it, which is the cutting of the clitoral hood. And that's the practice allegedly performed in most of Southeast Asia. That's the practice that's mostly practiced in Southeast Asia, allegedly. I say allegedly because until quite recent times, we don't know how exactly they were done. Often they were done by midwives. You have to understand that the whole procedure is in many countries was unregulated, done by traditional midwives in non-medical setting. What they cut and what they don't cut was a mystery to outsiders, and it creates another problem because the extent of the cutting is not well documented, and it was done by non-medical professionals and in non-medical settings. It is still done by non-medical professional in non-medical settings. In Southeast Asia. I mean, I interviewed a midwife who was banned, or had a license taken away to practice as a midwife by the government, because her eyesight was failing. And when I was interviewing her, she said she doesn't do it anymore unless the mother, a mother, really press her to do it, really urges her to do it.
And how frequent is that?
And I asked her, how often do you get these kind of requests to have an urgent need to cut? And she says 2 or 3 times a month.
Wow.
And this is done by a woman whose eyesight is failing, basically, and she cannot be a midwife because her eyesight is failing. And I wonder, how well she's going to be able to cut somebody. So you have this kind of conditions where midwives are doing the cutting, and yet possibly wholly unqualified to do any kind of operation like that. Yes, and what they cut out is unregulated. Like, how much do you cut? Does she really know how much to cut? We don't know. And if her eyesight is failing, can she know how much she should cut?
Yeah, that is a more extreme example. But what about advanced countries like Malaysia and Singapore? Do they still use midwives or do they use certified practitioner to actually do it?
Yes, in countries like Singapore and Malaysia, it's done in medical clinics. That's true. But once again, it's an unregulated practice. In terms of, in the case of Singapore, it's unregulated.
Anyone can do it.
No. I mean, it's done in medical clinics, but is it standardized? We need to see more studies done and to see that it is standardized and done, in a way that would not be harmful to the child, But once again, we spoke to a Saudi doctor. I interviewed a Saudi doctor who has seen cases of FGC for the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. He's a Western-trained Saudi doctor, and his specialty is the subject. And he's an OBGYN. He's a professor of medicine. And he assures me that this mere minor cutting of the clitoral hood and so forth, type 1A, as specified by WHO, is a myth, that it doesn't really exist. In the real world, and it's a myth because you would have to have a highly qualified pediatric surgeon specialist in this. As you can imagine, the baby's body is quite small.
Oh yeah.
And you have to have highly specialized tools to do this cutting, and under some form of anesthesia, which is not used actually in medical clinics.
In all of your research, is it?
In all the research, I've not found a case where anesthesia is used in the medical clinics. When I asked the doctors, and the midwives, whether there's some pain, yes, there is a little bit of pain, but there is healing is happens rather fast, according to the people who advocate this practice. But once again, if you talk to a specialist, in this case, a Saudi doctor and professor who has examined these issues for the last 20 years, he says it's not possible. You would basically risk doing some harm with the cutting, even the minor cutting, because it's a very highly specialized procedure that general practitioners are not qualified to do, according to him.
Do you see FGC as against human rights?
I think it goes beyond the issue of human rights, because it's based on fallacies, right? It's based on mythologies, and there's no proof that doing any kind of cutting or any kind of work there, minor cutting, that is, work there would actually keep a woman chaste, and prevent promiscuity.
The whole idea itself is a fallacy.
The whole idea is a fallacy. It's a myth. It's not based on logic, because if it is true, and we know the Malay community in Singapore and Malaysia, the vast number of them have experienced this female circumcision. We know that. So if that's true, then unplanned pregnancies and single motherhood and all those issues would disappear. And we know that's not the case, correct?
That's true. There is still quite a social issue among the Malay community.
So in spite of all the cutting, it hasn't, lowered, I guess, unplanned pregnancies, either in Malaysia or Singapore. That's my conclusion. I don't have the statistics right now off the top of my head, but those are very big issues in those countries, is it not?
Yeah. And furthermore, I want to add in, I know the civil societies from countries that you've been doing your research are working to curb female genital mutilation, either through trainings, through awareness programs and all. But what about the government? Do you see any effort by the governments in Asia, either curbing or at least reduce cases that would harm female babies?
Well, this whole issue, no matter what country we're in, it's a very uncomfortable issue. And even the governments tend to have a hands-off approach. In Kurdistan, where we worked, the activists managed to ultimately convince the government to introduce laws to end the practice. Ultimately, it happened in Kurdistan. So that's one success story, I guess. But in Kurdistan, the cutting there tend to be quite severe. So maybe that's a good thing. It's not. I don't think it's the same thing as what happens in Singapore and Malaysia. So those laws were introduced there, and that's one success story. But generally speaking, in many countries, unless there's a political agenda involved, they have a hands-off attitude. That's right. They have a hands-off attitude. They don't step in to prevent this. So that's the situation.
I see. So the way
it's a taboo issue in most countries. Nobody wants to talk about it. In many countries, they might even deny the existence. In Iraq, for example, where we worked, the Kurds at first denied that it happens there. When we show video and statistical evidence, then they change their mind and they'll say, oh no, it doesn't happen with the Arabs. And then more recently we've done surveys and we showed that, in the south and central part of Iraq, something like 25% or 22%, I can't remember the exact percentage of women are also cut. And among the Arab population. So they cannot deny it anymore that it doesn't exist in their country. This happened in many societies where they'll say that it does not exist here, but then we produce the evidence and it changed their minds. There are many places around the world that this happens, and nobody talks about it in their society, or they don't think it exists. In Singapore, for example, you could talk to someone of an Indian origin or Chinese origin, and you ask them, have you heard this term female circumcision? Chances are they would never have connected it with Singapore.
I see. And that was your experience in Singapore.
That's my experience in many countries, not just Singapore. Other races, or ethnicities, or religion, people from other religions, they've never heard of this before.
I see.
Even, among Malay women, I've met Malay women here in Singapore who didn't know it was done to them when they were children. And
they only knew about it later on, is it?
That's right. Have you heard this before? They didn't know about it until they were adults.
Oh, yeah.
That it happened to them.
I think a lot of the Malays here, some of it wouldn't even have known they actually have it or not, because no one actually told them about it. It's a practice that people don't really talk about it, interestingly.
Yeah, so
but it's so common.
Anytime it's almost a rule that anytime a society doesn't want to talk about any particular topic, there's something interesting going on that needs to be investigated. Why won't the society in general talk about a taboo issue?
Yeah.
So, as a social scientist myself, every time there's a taboo topic, I want to know what's going on, and it reveals deeper issues, basically. Yeah. And more interesting aspects of that society. That why are they reluctant to talk about this? It tells you something. It's a symptom of larger issues.
With that, thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Arlene. It's been a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you.